Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to another Threadbare review. Today's subject is once again the recommendation of patron JimJam78, and specifically they want me to take a look at the 2009 film District 9. Let's not waste any time and get straight into the meat. The story about the story. District 9 is an adaptation, but it doesn't adapt any novel or short story. Instead, it began as a short film created by Neil Blomkamp, a white South African director who got his start creating special effects and 3D animations for Hollywood films in the late 90s. By the early 2000s, Blomkamp was directing short films that mixed live action and CGI, and in particular, he created a set of shorts called Landfall that tied into the release of the video game Halo 3. It was around this time that Blomkamp created the short film Alive in Joburg, a mockumentary about alien refugees arriving in Johannesburg in South Africa, and the increasingly tense relationship between the refugees and the locals. In 2008, 20th Century Fox decided to fund a feature film set in the Halo universe, and they got filmmaker Peter Jackson to produce it. Jackson was impressed by Blomkamp's work on the Halo short films and picked him to direct the feature film, but then the project fell apart. But Jackson still wanted to work with Blomkamp, and so they decided to adapt Alive in Joburg instead, and they convinced Sony Pictures and TriStar to fund the project. Thanks to the big Hollywood budget, the film's genre went from mockumentary to action, although Blomkamp's directing style still involved a lot of naturalistic cinematography and documentary-style stock footage and interviews. The movie also remains an allegory for South African racism, both during and after apartheid. As such, the filming took place entirely within South Africa during the dry winter months, and the shantytown the aliens live in is an actual South African shantytown in the Johannesburg metro area. The film earned a worldwide gross of $211 million from a $30 million budget, and while it didn't do as well as previous summer blockbusters, it was remarkably successful in North America, considering that the director and the actors were almost entirely unknown in that region. The critical response was generally favorable too, although there were some objections regarding things like the one-dimensional portrayal of Nigerians in the film, and the fact that the protagonist at the very least starts out in the film as a white man with some very dismissive views of the aliens. But I think I'll judge for myself just how problematic these issues are, so let's move on. The review. Around 20 years ago, a massive alien ship came down to Earth and ended up hovering over the city of Johannesburg. After breaching the hull, the South African government discovered a group of alien refugees inside and offered them some support, although mostly they did so because everyone was watching them. Over the intervening 20 years, the alien refugee camp turned into a permanent shantytown. And recently, the government decided to forcibly relocate the 2.5 million aliens from District 9 to a concentration camp 200 kilometers away. They also decided to hire a mercenary company, Multinational United, to perform the forced relocation. The protagonist is Wilkus Vendemeru, who was put in charge of the relocation effort. Alien reactions range from confusion and anger to aggression and violence, as you might expect, and Wilkus demonstrates on multiple occasions his complete lack of respect or empathy for the aliens, which are derogatorily called prawns. However, when he tries to evict two aliens with the human names of Christopher and Paul from their home, he confiscates a vial of liquid that sprays on his face, and it causes him to start turning into a prawn. When the mercenaries find out about this, they abduct Wilkus and start conducting inhumane tests on him, the end goal of dissecting him while he's midway through the transformation. The reason they care is because prawn weaponry only works when a prawn is holding it, so all the weapons humans have confiscated from them have been unusable. However, Wilkus escapes, finds Christopher, and discovers that he has been trying to gather that liquid that spilled on Wilkus for years, because it can power a fallen command module and get it back up to the mothership so the mothership can take off again. The two of them assault the mercenary headquarters and a group of Nigerian smugglers to get what they need, and in the end, Wilkus holds off an assault in a prawn mech suit so that Christopher and his son can escape in the mothership, even though this means Wilkus will never be cured and will live out the rest of his life as a prawn. The film then ends without anyone knowing what will happen when the mothership returns. First off, I should mention that the CGI and live-action integration is top-notch. The prawns are almost skeletal in their proportions, and they have very inhumanly long arms and legs, and I figure that they were designed like that specifically to make sure that the audience would know that every last prawn in every scene is computer generated, and never a person in a suit. That being said, Wilkes's prawn arm is a prosthetic, and as a result, it's significantly more floppy than the CG prawn arms. Still, the film was very ambitious for demanding CGI inserts in almost every shot, and while I could sometimes see the seams, the special effects were otherwise very well made. Now, I can't talk too much about the plot without discussing the themes, so I'll leave most of that for the analysis section. However, one thing I can say in this segment is that I didn't really get the white savior vibe that some reviewers noticed. While it is true that Wilkes is instrumental in helping Christopher restart the mothership, he's not really the hero of the story. Wilkes is the protagonist, but Christopher is the hero. Christopher is the one who's been working for years to fix the mothership. He makes the final decision to go back home for help instead of curing Wilkes, and Wilkes ultimately accepts this decision instead of coming up with his own plan. The white savior complaint also ignores the fact that Wilkes goes through a very literal journey from a privileged white man to a non-white alien. But like I said, more on that later. On the other hand, I definitely get the complaints about the depiction of Nigerians in the film. I will say in the movie's favor that the Nigerian smugglers add an interesting complication to the plot, a third faction with its own agenda that inserts itself into the fight between the prawns and the mercenaries. And it is certainly true that there are areas in Africa where people follow the old ways and believe, among other things, that eating a part of an animal will give you its strength. However, as antagonists go, the Nigerians are only slightly more sympathetic than the child-murdering mercenaries, and the mercenaries are a multinational corporation that doesn't directly represent any one race or nationality, except maybe South Africa, but you're allowed to criticize your own nation. The other major complaint I have is with a plot hole that other reviewers have also mentioned. Why do the prawns put up with their treatment when they have tons of super advanced, super powerful weapons? It would make sense for the government to have confiscated everything resembling a weapon back when the prawns first arrived, but they apparently didn't, because the Nigerians keep buying weapons from the prawns, even though they can't use them. Wilkes even finds a weapons cache during the first part of the movie, and his assault on the mercenary headquarters is done with weapons from the Nigerians. So why aren't the prawns using these weapons? I mean, humans would probably win any conflict in the end, since we have the numbers and more combat vehicles, but it's odd that the prawns never try to defend themselves when they have the means to do so. Still, questions like that aside, District 9 is an impressive movie on a technical level, and it has a lot more to say than the average action film. Overall, I recommend giving it a watch. The analysis. District 9 gets its name from the District 6 incident that took place in real-life Cape Town. During the 1960s, the South African government declared the mostly black neighborhood of District 6 to be a crime-ridden slum, and in the 1970s, they forcibly evicted around 60,000 people and moved them from the city's center to much less valuable land on the Cape Flats. This mass eviction was considered excessive even in South Africa at the time, and it's part of the reason apartheid became an international issue in the 1980s. So that's where the movie's allegory begins, with a reference to one of the most infamous incidents in South Africa's history. Once the movie actually begins, Wilkes and the other white humans describe what they think the prawns are like. According to them, prawns don't understand the concept of property, they are naturally servile and become listless when left alone, and they think that doing things like derailing trains and burning houses are fun activities, while we humans treat them as serious attacks. But it's important to remember that they can't help it, considering how inferior they are. Incidentally, all of these statements have been said about native Africans by colonizing Europeans. Then there's the time when Wilkes finds a bunch of unauthorized prawn eggs and burns the building they're in while laughing about abortions and the sound the eggs make when they pop. He also immediately assumes that Christopher is running a black market computer shop when he steps into the prawn's house, and he doesn't even ask if Christopher has a permit before seizing everything that looks valuable. But then, Wilkes grows a prawn arm, and his white privilege gets revoked. He gets abducted out of a hospital and subjected to illegal biological experiments, something that's happened to black people in the United States and very possibly also in South Africa. He's refused service in a fast food restaurant, and the cashier calls the cops on him even though all he wants is a hamburger. The Nigerians degrade him and laugh at him when he goes to them for food and help. In short, Wilkes's life becomes miserable and hopeless when he stops being white, and it's only then that he realizes that the prawns have to live through all of this abuse every single day. And once he does, he starts to treat them with a lot more respect. Wilkes is not a white savior because by the time he starts being a good person, he stops being white. Instead, by the end of the movie, he turns completely into a prawn and lives as one of them for the rest of his life. Something else that happens at the end is a series of interviews with Wilkes's friends and family members, and they all say that he was a good man who didn't deserve what happened to him. That's simply not true. Wilkes deserved everything that happened to him, and the only reason he became a better person is because of everything that happened to him. The protagonist of District 9 is white because the target audience of the film is white. Specifically, it's trying to show white people the kind of oppression and desperation that black South Africans have had to live through. And by using a science fiction allegory, it puts the white protagonist in a black man's shoes. The allegory also allows the audience to take a step back from South Africa and see the parallels between the prawn and oppressed populations throughout the world. Because it's not just Africans or African Americans who suffer. Oppression is oppression no matter who it happens to. And if you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a prawn face forever. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.